Bloomberg Audio Studios.
Podcasts, radio, news.
You're listening to the Bloomberg Balance of Power podcast. Catch us live weekdays at noon Eastern on Apple CarPlay and Android Auto with the Bloomberg Business app. Listen on demand wherever you get your podcasts or watch us live on YouTube.
On this debate day, we're finally here, the 27th of June. We're told the most important day of the presidential campaign yet. Maybe we'll look back and call it the most pivotal day of the campaign in total. I was just talking to my friend John coming into the studio today. He said, I'd rather watch the Golden Girls. At least they're funny. But new numbers from Quinnipiac tell you otherwise. This is going to be a show tonight. Quinnipiac national poll of registered voters, 7 in 10. 73% say it is likely they will watch this debate tonight. 25% have other plans. That's pretty good. That's like Oscars numbers, right? This could be the Super Bowl of politics once again. In Atlanta, Joe Biden, Donald Trump on stage for the first time in 4 years. And you know the deal with the rules. Yeah, they're going to cut off the mic when the time is up. But this is going to be a fascinating thing to see. It's in the studio, of course, without the audience, where the two candidates will be. And then all heck breaks loose after in the spin room when the surrogates come in and they talk to the journalists. You know what? David Gura is already in there. I love this. Starting early in Atlanta, reporting for Bloomberg, of course, the host of the Big Take podcast. But he's all ours today, David. How are things looking so far?
Well, it's cool in here, which may be one of the driving reasons why I've come inside. But it's great to speak with you, Joe, of course. And yeah, we're very curious how all of this unfolds. The head of the network that is putting on this debate has said, quite frankly, that he wants to harken back to something that we saw in 1960. That is the debate between JFK and Richard Nixon, that first TV debate. He wants to pare it back and not have the audience, not have any of that artifice. We'll see how that works. We'll see how these two candidates do with that kind of setting. I think what's prompting a lot of the curiosity that you're describing, numbers that might even be better than the Oscars or the Super Bowl, is just seeing how these two candidates navigate that, what they're going to look like on stage independently and with each other, and how they interact with the moderators of this debate. It is a curiosity, and a curiosity, of course, Joe, that's coming a few months earlier than most cycles. We're having this debate before we get to the political conventions, which is also novel in itself.
It is novel, and you wonder what we'll think about this by the time we get to potentially a second debate as they've scheduled in September. David, you know I love to go to ground when you get on the road in a case like this. Tell us what it's like. I'm assuming you've got media from around the world there tonight, and will you have venue to talk to surrogates in the spin room later?
They'll be here. We're looking forward to talking to them, and we'll see who shows up and who is carrying the flag for both of these candidates. Right now, it's fairly quiet, and I will say one of the weirder facets of this is by virtue of the fact that the debate is taking place at CNN studios, some removed from here, it does feel like there is a wider geographic distance than perhaps there is. We're not sort of interfacing a lot with the teams that are surrounding these two candidates. I should say Joe Biden and Donald Trump arriving in town a little bit later this afternoon, but everyone with whom I've spoken knows this is happening, is complaining about the traffic that's already started to slow down across the city. So it is certainly central, both geographically and on the minds of most Atlantans here today.
The president arrives 2:15 p.m. Dobbins Air Reserve Base. According to his schedule, he's going straight from Camp David to Atlanta, Georgia today. David, are we going to see the traditional walk-through, or do we not see the president and former president until the lights go on at 9 o'clock tonight?
I don't think that there's anything on the schedule up until that point, and we are kind of watching to see what they do after this debate concludes, both in the hours after it and the days to come. So there are watch parties throughout the city. There are also fundraisers for these two candidates. Donald Trump expected to go to one at Kelly Loeffler's house. She, of course, the former senator from Georgia. And at that event, we talked about those surrogates just a moment ago, many of those surrogates who are also this group of finalists for the VP nomination for Donald Trump expected to be at that party as well. And then Joe Biden likely to go to a party of his supporters in Atlanta as well before they hit the road. And where are they going to go to? They're going to go to swing states here in the South. Joe Biden going to North Carolina. obviously has been a purplish or purple trending state in recent election cycles. Donald Trump going to Virginia to speak to his supporters there tomorrow, and then the president, Joe Biden, going to the Northeast, to the Hamptons and to New Jersey to do some high-dollar fundraising on the heels of this. So as you know, Joe, the event itself, always exciting and telegraphed so much, and then we kind of see how that kind of changes or alters the message that these candidates are going to give in the run-up to those conventions, and then, of course, the general election in November.
Yeah, it's remarkable. They're not technically their party's formal nominees, but here we are tonight. David Gura, you're in for a day. I'm really glad you're there, and we thank you. We'll catch up a little bit later on here on Balance of Power on the late edition, and then in our special coverage tonight. David's going to help us shepherd our way through this whole thing starting at 8 p.m. Eastern Time here on Bloomberg TV and radio, on YouTube, where you can search Bloomberg Global News and find us. We'll have a great panel for you. Rick Davis and Kristen Hahn will be here for the pregame and the post-debate analysis. You don't need to go anywhere else but right here on Bloomberg for all of this, with the big curtain raiser, courtesy our friend Don Levy at Siena College. More than two-thirds of voters said the outcome of Donald Trump's criminal case in Manhattan made no difference to their vote. As we step into this debate tonight, the head-to-head results of the survey, 48%, 44%, Mr. Trump with his biggest lead in the Siena poll. Glad to say Don Levy is back with us. He runs the Research Institute at Siena College. This is the poll on the front page of the New York Times today. Don, his biggest point margin when calculated before figures are rounded, to be exact here, Mr. Trump's lead with registered voters was an even larger 6 percentage points. How do you rationalize that after so much noise in his campaign?
Well, we see a lot of movement in the campaign right now amongst a couple of groups, most especially independents. Trump picked up about 3 points over our poll in April amongst independents. And actually, he closed the gap with women to a certain degree. Women is a constituency that President Biden certainly needs to carry and carry strongly. And that moved from a double-digit lead down to only about 6 points amongst women. So we see some movement across the electorate. But we continue to focus to a great deal on a group of people that we call the double haters. And I think that what people need to look at as they look at this debate is everyone's going to look at it through their own prism. About 75% of the electorate is baked in at this point. Those are people who have a favorable view of one of the candidates and an unfavorable view of the other. So, for example, of those voters who are favorable on Trump and unfavorable on Biden, they tell us that they're going to vote for Trump at rates of about 97%. Biden is similar in the other direction. But right now, if the vote were taking place just amongst those people, the love haters, as we call them, Trump is up by 2 or 3 points in the battleground states and nationally. It's the double haters, the people who have an unfavorable view of both Biden and Trump, who ironically are set up to decide the election and hopefully will be amongst those 77% that we polled who say they're going to tune in tonight.
Those, ironically, will decide the election. Okay, so, Don, for a seasoned pollster who's been talking to these people, you guys, come back around and follow up on interviews with your sample. Do we have any reason to believe that an event like tonight could move a double hater in one direction or the other?
Well, I think absolutely we do, because some of the issues that affect double haters are just how they feel towards these two candidates. Right now, Biden is losing in the too old battle, but Trump is losing in the temperament battle. And frankly, when you look at these double haters, those double haters will end up saying, I'll probably vote for Trump. But they're doing so more so because they view Trump as better on policies that matter to them, most especially the economy. When you look at the double haters who tell us that they might vote for Biden, it's because they simply don't like Donald Trump more than they dislike Joe Biden. If Donald Trump assuages those concerns tonight, that's going to help him with those double haters. If Joe Biden demonstrates that he's still with it, he's not too old to be president of the United States, that's going to help them. Yeah. It's those qualities, those personal qualities, that could sway those double haters a little bit one way or another. You brought up the trial before. Amongst double haters, over 20% of double haters say, you know what, That trial made me feel more like I want to vote for a third party candidate rather than either the two major party candidates. This debate is an opportunity for both Biden and Trump to speak to those double haters and to try to move them ever so slightly in their direction. Right now, Biden leads amongst double haters by about 7 or 8 points. He needs a bigger advantage there if he's going to overcome Trump's current advantage.
And you just used the key word, I think, Don, that's temperament, right? If someone's going to be swayed away from Donald Trump tonight, it might not have anything to do with policy, but the way he comports himself. And we haven't seen Donald Trump in a debate in 4 years. We have seen him on the stump recently saying some pretty wild things. But doesn't this apply to both? If Joe Biden comes in swinging and yelling, does his temperament be called suddenly into question?
Oh, absolutely. And especially amongst these double haters who are, you can call them persuadable, you can call them swing voters. They're the ones whose minds are not completely made up. Right now, they rate Biden on temperament really at about a break even, slightly better. Trump is a negative about 10 points on temperament. So the temperament battle is up for grabs amongst these double haters, these pivotal voters, and how these candidates look, their facial expressions, how they treat one another, whether they can look through that camera and connect with American voters is going to make a big difference tonight and could very well turn the tenor of the election as we move on into these dog days of summer.
Yeah. We've watched Joe Biden's favorabilities hover from upper 30s to low 40s for a pretty long period of time here. Is there an equivalent for Donald Trump since he's not in office?
Well, we track certainly Donald Trump's favorability. He tends to be a similar, if not lower number overall. But the difference being that the size of the group who like Trump but don't like Biden is now slightly larger than the group who like Biden and don't like Trump. If you go back to 2016, when we first started to look at this dynamic between Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump, Clinton always maintained a slight advantage in the percentage of Americans who viewed her favorably and Trump negatively, as opposed to the opposite. So Biden right now is losing the battle of these love haters, if you will, but yet he still holds a slight advantage in the double haters. The double haters, by the way, tend to be younger. They tend to have voted Democratic in the last election by almost 20 points. So that's a group that Biden has lost. He needs to get those back. And they are ideologically, as a group, more predisposed to vote for Biden than they are Trump. Yet at the same time, they're desperately concerned about the economy. Biden also needs tonight to somehow, some way, convince these double haters and all Americans that he understands the pressures that they feel economically, and he's doing something about it. Right now, Trump has a decided advantage among Americans who feel as though he, rather than Biden, is a better economic steward.
Double haters. I feel like it'd be a great name for a punk rock band, Don. If I can just pull out here and pick a headline, maybe the most important thing that you've said so far. Donald Trump, if I heard you right, has pulled even with Joe Biden among women. If that's true, and you consider most of the bad news on abortion, if I call it bad news, potentially threatening news to Donald Trump politically when it comes to reproductive rights. We've gotten through the Supreme Court decisions at this point. Obviously, Roe is behind Donald Trump. Is that meaningful here, and how much of a problem for Joe Biden?
Well, it is a problem for Joe Biden. What in our most recent poll we found was that Biden's lead amongst women went from 16 points to only 5 points. So Trump picked up 11 points amongst women. And so it's that fight, that balance between issues like abortion and issues around the economy. Right now, women have moved to the tune of 11 points towards Trump. I think that Biden is going to wrestle with that this evening and try to remind women that he represents their rights relative to reproductive freedom. At the same time, the economy weighs on, of course, not just women, but everyone. It's the economy which seems to have pushed a greater percentage of women, not quite break even, but a greater percentage of women to now say that they would vote for Donald Trump rather than where they have historically been, more so in the Democratic column.
He's leading the conversation today across the nation ahead of this debate. Don Levy, Siena College Research Institute Director. Thank you, Don, for the primer as we get started on this debate day. This is Bloomberg.
You're listening to the Bloomberg Balance of Power podcast. Catch us live weekdays at noon Eastern on Apple CarPlay and Android Auto with the Bloomberg Business app. You can also listen live on Amazon Alexa from our flagship New York station. Just say, Alexa, play Bloomberg 1130.
The stakes this evening are incredibly high, both for the former and incumbent president. And as we look ahead to what Joe Biden needs to accomplish for Democrats at large tonight, we want to bring in Democratic Congresswoman Abigail Spanberger of Virginia, who is joining us now live from Capitol Hill. Happy debate day, Congresswoman. Always great to see you here on Bloomberg TV and radio. When we look at what Joe Biden needs to accomplish tonight, is it so much about the policy or about how he performs and speaks about it?
I think it's about the choice between two men who are putting themselves both forward as potential presidents again. It's a question of which former or current president do we, the United States of America, the American people, want to have at the helm of our country. And so, yes, policy will be a part of it, certainly our rights and our freedoms, certainly our continued growth of the economy. But I think what it really comes down to is, do we want to return to a time where under the former President Trump, we had attacks on communities. We had a questionable situation on the global stage. We had a president who wanted to pull away from NATO. We had a president who was willing and aggressively move forward in pulling back people's rights from voting rights to abortion rights. Or do we want to have a president like the president we have now, President Biden, who as a person is committed to the progress of this country, growing our economy, continuing to lower unemployment, continuing our long-term recovery out of COVID, which, of course, as you all well know, is the best in the developed world, protecting the rights and the freedoms of our fellow Americans, and importantly to me, as a former CIA officer and someone with a background in national security, protecting the role of American leadership on the global stage.
Well, that's a big picture view, Congresswoman. Your view from Virginia's 7th Congressional District is so important because you straddle such a wide swath of ages and demographics. A lot of people say that inflation is the number one issue in this race. That's what people are talking about. But you just gave us a 30,000-foot view that gives us a choice on the approach to democracy, on big picture themes. What do the people of Virginia then want to hear tonight?
It's about the approach of how we fix problems. Certainly across Virginia, across the 7th District, the issue of costs in the grocery store continues to be an important one that I hear about all the time. And so it's a question of whose approach, whose policies, who's committed to the American people and to working to continue to lower costs, to working to continue to decrease inflation, ensure that more people can buy a home or have an affordable rent. More people can have the ability to move between jobs because not only is unemployment low, but options and good jobs are there and available to them. And notably, people can care about multiple things at one time. And so, yes, across the board, I hear about the issues of cost. I hear about the challenges that people are facing in our economy, and small business owners. Low unemployment's good, but there's still challenges for small business owners trying to find workers, right? There's always, even when the news is good, there's challenges for some folks. And so the question becomes, what are the issues that are most important to voters? Certainly costs among them, but also it's about approach. It's about which president, and right now we have, a current and a former, is going to do the good work, the important work of moving us forward on the issues that matter to people. And certainly, we hear a lot of talk about issues of freedom, and particularly abortion rights and access to IVF and contraception, because across my district and across Virginia, there are many people who care about more than one thing. And so certainly we need a president in this 2024 election who is focused on addressing all of the concerns that people have, recognizing those that have the greatest immediacy, certainly, but also recognizing that, yes, part of this is about approach, how someone seeks to govern and how someone seeks to lead.
Well, Congresswoman, you have brought up the issue of abortion rights a few times already in this conversation. We, of course, got news on that today from the Supreme Court, which at least for now is allowing emergency access to abortion to continue in Idaho, even if this ruling is more on procedural grounds than actually on the merits of the case. But this is now the second time, as we are at the end of this court's term, that they have ruled in favor of protecting, at least for the time being, abortion rights. How should that change Joe Biden's messaging around that issue tonight?
Well, I think it's important to understand what the ruling or this discussion is actually even about. The question is about whether EMTALA, right, a law put in place under President Reagan to ensure that someone who walks into a hospital with a life-threatening illness would be able to get the health care access that they need. The decision today is whether or not, when a woman walks into a hospital potentially facing a life-threatening complication to her pregnancy, whether it is appropriate and required or not against the law for a medical doctor to save her life. This wasn't a ruling that codifies abortion access. This isn't a ruling that does anything to advance the rights of women. This is a ruling that, say, doctors can't look at a woman and say, you must die because of our state law. And so I don't think that it should change much of Joe Biden's, President Biden's positioning in the discussion of the debate. In fact, if anything, I think it will make clear that we are one court decision away, potentially, from a doctor being able to look at a dying woman and say, I'm sorry, I can't help you.
Well, it's not lost on us, Congresswoman, that Donald Trump is going to make a beeline for your state after the debate tonight. He's on his way to Chesapeake, Virginia. He'll be speaking in that Norfolk area, an awfully important area for electoral votes, with Governor Glenn Youngkin. Virginia is coming to play a fascinating role in this campaign as maybe the purplest of states. I don't know how you'd describe it, Congresswoman, but what does it tell you that Donald Trump is going to Virginia to give Glenn Youngkin a hug tomorrow?
So I think Virginia is a wonderful place and everyone should visit. So I certainly don't fault the former president to wanting to come to our great Commonwealth. But notably, more of the question is why it is that our governor, who has previously never welcomed the president and in fact left the state the last time President Trump came to Virginia, is now going to be there to, as you say, give him a hug.
Well, Congresswoman, it, though, just speaks more widely to this idea that the Trump campaign has been espousing, that polling suggests they are competitive in the state of Virginia. They actually think that they could win it. Does Joe Biden need to be spending more time there himself? Should he add a list to the swing states he has been visiting frequently since Super Tuesday?
So President Biden spends a fair amount of time in Virginia. He was in Virginia just maybe the month before last. Certainly we have an incredible team on the ground working for the Biden campaign. And, certainly our own Senator Tim Kaine is up for re-election this year and barnstorming across the state, as are so many of our elected folks working in roles as surrogates. So I certainly welcome President Biden to come to Virginia, but Virginia is not going to go for former President Trump in this election. I feel quite certain saying that.
Congresswoman, with your background in national security and intelligence and from your perch on the Intelligence Committee, I wonder your thoughts as we watch Evan Gershkovich's trial begin in Russia this week. It's a story we were talking about quite a bit earlier in the week. Yesterday was the start of that trial. What would a President Trump mean for his detention?
First, I want to just begin by recognizing the incredible sacrifices that members of the media, particularly those who travel to tell stories into countries where the media is not just disrespected, but is targeted and is arrested and is imprisoned, as we have seen. in this case in Russia. I think that it would be deeply worrisome from my perspective, but I think it's one that is far more broadly held. If former President Trump were to again enter the White House, for two reasons. One, he has always taken the side of Vladimir Putin over our own intelligence agencies, over our own experts. He has spoken in defense of an authoritarian regime. And notably, he at home has done a great deal to degrade, to demean, and to target the press and the media for doing the job that is theirs to do. They are supposed to be critical of us, elected leaders. You all are supposed to hold us to account. And so I think a president who seeks to be more like a Putin here at home would do very, very little to defend an American who in pursuit of telling the truth, in pursuit of reporting back, is
Congresswoman,
now...
Thank you. Abigail Spanberger with The View from Virginia. This is Bloomberg.
You're listening to the Bloomberg Balance of Power podcast. Catch us live weekdays at noon Eastern on Apple CarPlay and Android Auto with the Bloomberg Business app. Listen on demand wherever you get your podcasts or watch us live on YouTube.
Taking you from New York with Charlie Pellet to here in Washington with me and Joe, down to Atlanta today as we preview, less than 8 hours from now, the first presidential debate between Joe Biden and Donald Trump. It is an incredibly high-stakes evening for both campaigns, and it's worth noting this will be Donald Trump back in Georgia after getting indicted in that state many months ago. Joe, of course, there is not the prevailing thinking right now that he will end up going to trial in that racketeering case that was brought against him there. But of course, this is going to be an appearance by the former president after being a convicted felon in a separate criminal case in New York. The thing is, polling out within the last 24 hours suggests that conviction doesn't matter much at all as we head into the season.
Isn't this something we've heard this anecdotally? Siena puts numbers on it today. Front of the New York Times. We talked to Don Levy about it earlier in the program. More than 2/3 of voters in this poll, first time Siena polls since the trial ended, say the outcome of his criminal case made no difference to their vote. 2/3. In fact, some Republicans were more likely to support him. It's different than conventional wisdom might suggest. Another interesting number I'll throw at you. Quinnipiac. You wonder who the heck's going to watch this thing tonight? 7 in 10 registered voters say they will be watching, which would make this among the highest rated things to ever happen on television. Of course, we'll have it here for you on Bloomberg. Let's assemble our panel. As Kailey said, we've put together a great one for you today. Rick Davis is with us, Republican strategist. Of course, Bloomberg Politics contributor, joined by Joel Rubin, a Democratic strategist, former Deputy Assistant Secretary of State of the Obama administration. It's great to see both of you here. Rick, you've prepared candidates for debates just like this one. Obviously, they're presumptive nominees in this case. It's a little different. It's coming pretty early. But the stakes are arguably higher. If there's an audience like this Quinnipiac poll suggests, 7 in 10, we cannot underscore the impact this could have on the campaign. How are you looking at it?
Yeah, I think that this was a real gamble. I think to forego the Commission on Debates and try this, one CNN debate as a test to see whether or not people would tune in. Certainly, the polling data indicates that they likely will, and we know that historically high debates are like 84 million people tuning into view, and that will be dwarfed, I'm sure, by the follow-on social media clips that people will view that happened the night before. So I think we can rest assured, based on what we know today, this is going to be something that voters are looking into because they're curious about what's going on with these two guys. 45 versus 46. Two presidents have never debated like this in a modern era. And so it's the kind of thing I think is as much a curiosity as it is a determining factor, because the reality is the country is divided very equally. And we're really talking about a few percentage points that are really up for grabs right now. And those are the folks that probably have the greatest stake in watching this debate.
Yeah, we're talking about a race divided by a few percentage points. If the latest polling is to believe New York Times, Siena has the spread between Trump and Biden 3 points. Trump, of course, is leading. His lead is even greater with registered voters. Something else interesting, though, in this poll, Joel, is that only 72% of voters who said they voted for Biden 4 years ago approve of the job he is doing as president. This is 90% of Republicans say they view Donald Trump favorably. It does seem that Trump has had much more success in consolidating his base of support than Joe Biden at this point. How does he reassemble the 2020 coalition this time around? How can he advance that effort further tonight?
Kailey, this is the question that the campaign is grappling with every day. And it's the kind of discussion that I feel very confident that they're going to be able to execute in terms of making the case. Look, Joe Biden has been running the country for the last 3.5 years. Donald Trump has been in and out of court and spending a lot of time on social media and doing things to get his base fired up. He did lose, I should say, 20% on a consistent basis in the recent primary. So I'm not sure about that 90%. But President Biden, he likes to say that don't compare me to the Almighty, compare me to the alternative. And the alternative will be on full display tonight. And that's going to really remind Democrats who, we're kind of a little bit behind the motivation factor when we see our guy in the White House. It's going to remind us about what's at stake in this election. And a lot is at stake. Fundamental freedoms for women, for LGBTQ Americans, a question of competence, a question of integrity, all of these issues that motivated Democrats in 2020, they're going to come right back to the fore. And I think you're going to see a real big jump in that motivation going forward from tonight.
Rick, these two gentlemen are going to be in people's living rooms tonight, if at least this goes well. That's what they're hoping for. We keep talking about temper and flare-ups, people acting crazy. To the extent that you've spent time with candidates, experienced the nerves that preceded an event like this, how important is a sense of humor?
Oh, I think it's critical, at least just to cut the very stiff air that exists, especially right before the debate. I mean, I like to put myself, in the timetable. And tonight, both these candidates are going to sit down with a very select group of people to have dinner. It's late enough in this debate; they're going to want to eat first. And the most important thing that I've found in the past, whether it was for John McCain or George Bush or Bob Dole or any of these candidates that had big debates in their lifetime, was to break the sort of tension in the room and have some fun. I remember when Lindsey Graham showed up at a presidential debate wearing a John McCain rubber mask and, basically went on to pretend to be in the debate tonight and told John that, look, if there was anything going wrong with him, he'd be happy to step in with the rubber mask that night. And so, you just got to have somebody just change the topic a little bit to get these guys relaxed, because as we've talked, it's a tense moment for anybody. And this is one that will be tense for both Joe Biden and Donald Trump.
So it'll be tense, just as all presidential debates are. But as we've mentioned, there are many things that are making this particular presidential debate different. Not only the commission's lack of involvement, but the rules of engagement here with the cutting off of microphones, with the lack of a live audience, also with the fact that it's taking place in not only a swing state, but a state in which one of the candidates on the stage has been indicted on multiple felonies in the case related to 2020 election subversion, the racketeering case that was brought against Trump and many other defendants. Of course, what went down in Georgia has made Donald Trump a few enemies even within his own party, or at least those who aren't eager to vote for him, including the governor of Georgia, Brian Kemp, who had this to say on CNN last night.
In the Georgia primary, I didn't vote for anybody. I voted, but I didn't vote for anybody. The race was already over when the primary got here.
But you didn't vote for Donald Trump?
I didn't vote for anybody.
Why not?
Because the race is over with.
He didn't vote for anyone. Okay. But he decidedly did not vote for Donald Trump. Joel, I would love to have you weigh in on this, considering what happened in Georgia in 2020, everything in the aftermath, how we should be thinking about the state of Georgia for Trump and Biden in 2024.
Yeah, Kailey, I mean, I think Donald Trump's already been fingerprinted down in Georgia, so maybe he doesn't have to worry about getting hauled in again. Look, what Brian Kemp, the governor, who won convincingly against a Donald Trump endorsement or attacks, I should say, he basically demonstrated the lingering resentment within Republican leadership and within many Republicans around the country towards Donald Trump's actions in that election. And look, he's not alone. Many people who closely advised and worked for Donald Trump, up to his vice president, have said he's not fit for office, have said he should never be near the Oval Office again, have said that he tried to overthrow democracy. The Secretary of Defense who served for him, Mark Esper, said that he tried to use or wanted to use the military to overturn the election results. So I'm glad that Brian Kemp is loyal to the American Constitution. I think that Americans will see President Biden is loyal to the American Constitution. I'm confident that the moderators will ask about whether or not Donald Trump will accept the results. And he, when asked in 2020, basically said no and implied that he was going to have the Proud Boys, the white supremacist group, take action if necessary. And this is a man, one last thing I should mention, who said that he would only be a dictator on day one. Those are the kinds of, if he wins again, those are the kinds of stakes that we're looking at. Brian Kemp didn't like it that President Trump tried to undermine the will of his voters in Georgia and steal that election. And clearly that has not been repaired.
Something tells me you'll hear that line tonight. Rick, we've only got a minute left. What do you tell your candidate about how to deal with the moderator, or in tonight's case, the moderators?
Well, they're going to have two totally different approaches tonight, right? Joe Biden is going to be very solicitous of the moderators. He's going to ask for extra, like, did I use up all my time? Can I? He's like a Boy Scout. He wants to play by the rules. And that's what we saw in the two debates before with Donald Trump. Donald Trump will abuse the moderators. He'll look for every opportunity to make the case that this is 3-on-1. And throughout the MAGA world, this debate is not a debate between him and Joe Biden, but him against Joe Biden and the two CNN moderators. And so he'll make good use of them as a foil. And I think that that's part of the temperament issue that he's got to judge, is to, just how negative is he going to come out. But, he'll definitely treat them differently than Joe Biden's going to.
All right, Rick Davis, Bloomberg politics contributor and Republican strategist, and Joel Rubin, former Deputy Assistant Secretary of State under President Obama and Democratic strategist. Thank you both so much for joining us on this debate day.
You're listening to the Bloomberg Balance of Power podcast. Catch us live weekdays at noon Eastern on Apple CarPlay and Android Auto with the Bloomberg Business app. You can also listen live on Amazon Alexa from our flagship New York station. Just say, Alexa, play Bloomberg 1130.
We're live from Washington with an eye on Atlanta. Kailey, the big game starts tonight. The debate at 9 p.m. Eastern time. Our special coverage will start at 8. But the president is on his way there now. He's left Camp David on his way to Atlanta. Donald Trump and Joe Biden on stage for the first time in 4 years in the Siena College poll we've been talking about with the New York Times, with a remarkable statistic. Rick Davis mentioned it a short time ago. 60% of registered voters think Mr. Trump will perform very or somewhat well in the matchup. 46% the same about Joe Biden. So that's where the bar is set for the many people at home tonight.
Yeah, and arguably Donald Trump had a hand in setting that bar low for Joe Biden,
That's
as
right.
he has repeatedly challenged him to debate him anytime, anywhere, any place. Now seems to be trying to lower the bar for himself in return, talking about how the moderators and CNN, which of course is the network hosting the debate, could be rigged against him. But what it all speaks to, Joe, is that the stakes tonight are incredibly high.
That's
and
right.
who is perceived to have the better performance potentially could get ahead in an election that we know is going to be incredibly close and potentially incredibly volatile, and that's why markets will be watching it very carefully, especially if we get specific policy outlined by these candidates tonight. So here with a closer look at what's at stake for the markets and how markets are positioned ahead of tonight's event is Bloomberg markets correspondent Abigail Doolittle, who is joining us now from New York. So Abigail, where are we likely to see the market reaction depending on how tonight goes?
What's really interesting, Kailey, right now relative to current markets, we're not seeing too much of a reaction at all. And this is interesting only because something that we know about markets investors, they love certainty. Another way of saying that is that markets hate uncertainty. And we clearly have this big unknown in November. So if we go out to October and November, there the uncertainty, the fear is showing. And that's showing in something called the VIX. That's an index that measures volatility of the markets. It is heightened right now at a 17 to 18 level. But right now, going into this debate, it's at a 12. We have Bitcoin that's seen as another tell on volatility, risk on, risk off. It's above an important support level, above 60. So going into the debate, investors seem relatively calm. But as you mentioned, anything is possible. You were talking with Joe about the idea that former President Donald Trump, that folks out there in the world, 60% think that he might have a better performance. But the truth of the matter is we really don't know. I mean, maybe that mute button saves him in some ways because he is a little bit of a wild card. There is, of course, fear that President Biden may have some problems around coherency and that sort of thing. But if it turns into a make or break moment for either of these presidential candidates, it means that the relatively narrow gap, 5 to 6% with former President Trump in the lead, could widen. Now, on the one hand, you would think that would provide certainty, but I think in this particular election year, I think that any sort of big volatile moment tonight, that's going to probably bring that VIX and volatility expectations even higher.
Well, it would be incredible to put numbers on it. And I'm always compelled by the conventional wisdom, Abigail, that the Republican, in this case Donald Trump, is better for the markets than the Democrat here, Joe Biden, who's seen, more than 30 all-time highs for the S&P 500 this year. The fact is, when you look at history, it shows us the markets, by a small margin, but the markets actually tend to outperform under Democratic administrations. Does Wall Street care about history in this case?
It's interesting you're saying that because I was about to mention that typically the markets do, and again, by a small margin, outperform under Democratic presidents. You know, something to think about here is it's not just the presidential election in the fall. It's also going to be the narrowly controlled Senate by the Democrats right now, and the Republicans have that narrow lead in the House. What investors would really like to see is one party controlling all. You and Kailey were mentioning the possibility of policy changes. Something that's really up for grabs is tax policy. We simply don't have enough information right now, but the Tax Cut and Jobs Act that was passed back in 2017, it expires next year. If it expires and nothing new is put in, corporate tax rates could go up to 35%. I believe that the Democrats, that the Biden administration has even floated the idea of a 28% hike on the expiration. The Republicans looking at something like 15%. Interestingly, and this may in some way support the idea that investors do like President Trump, former President Trump, just a bit better. The most highly taxed on an absolute basis companies, they're doing just fine this year. And frankly, for a couple of years, Apple, Berkshire Hathaway, Microsoft, and Exxon. It's also, of course, we have DJT, Donald Trump's own personal stock in a way of his media company, up 40% this week. So that seems to support some of the statistics that the both of you are talking about.
This is great. Great setup. Abigail, thank you. Abigail Doolittle, Bloomberg Markets correspondent with us live from New York. As we carry on from Washington with Balance of Power and add the voice of Andy Blocker. Been looking forward to this conversation from Invesco, where he's Global Head of Public Policy and Strategic Partnerships. Andy, welcome to the table. It's great to see you today. I suspect you've got your watch party. What do you make of this, though? What do the markets, what does the so-called investor, of course not a monolith, think of this Democrat and this Republican tonight? Is it a wash for Wall Street?
Well, I think generally speaking, it is more of a wash. If you look at it from a macro perspective, I mean, we've got a report out that basically says it doesn't make a difference. Do not do your investing based on who's president, if they're Republican or Democrat. So we did a study that showed, for the last 100 years, if you just only were invested with Republicans, you would be this much. Only Democrats, this much. Stay invested, this much. So the question is where you're invested, not whether you're invested.
Okay, but there's arguably a few things that could change that depending on who is president. For example, Donald Trump has floated the idea of tariffing everything coming from China at a 60% rate, which everyone we've spoken to, economists and otherwise, have suggested effectively cuts off the trading relationship between the two largest economies in the world. Wouldn't that fundamentally shift what the investment outlook looks like when we're talking about policy this extreme?
So that goes to what I said, it's specifically where you're invested and what. So tariffs are inflationary. So 60% with China will be inflationary. The 10% across the board for every country will be inflationary. But we really, in the markets right now, are looking at it as an opening bid. We don't really think that any of these tariffs are going to be implemented at that level. They may be implemented less, depending on what country, but he's going to do things country by country and see what we can get for that. Hey, you want your 10% or do you want to give us something over here that we want? Same thing with China. So I think to the extent that it becomes more real, that we believe 60% would actually be implemented, that would have a major impact on the market, especially in the early days. So you're going to see a lot of volatility in the beginning, and it could have an impact until it settles out.
It's a great old saying on Wall Street, gridlock is good when it comes to Washington. I wonder, are investors less concerned about whether it's a D or an R in the White House, but more concerned that there's balance of power on both ends of Pennsylvania Avenue?
Joe, I think that's a great point. I think we love split government. in the markets because it really lowers the bid-ask spread of how far left or right you can go. It keeps you in the center until you get things there where there's a consensus, and that's where it's more predictable for us, and it leads us out from major policy changes.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so arguably, what we're all expecting, at least at this time, it seems that you're looking at a Senate that may flip red, a House that has the potential to flip blue, which means 2025, from a tax policy perspective, could get really, really messy because, as Abigail was just talking about, the 2017 tax cuts, at least a large part of them, are going to expire this year, potentially could impact the economic outlook if they do so. If they're held, obviously that has implications for the deficit and the long-term trajectory of that. How do you look at the short-term versus long-term effects of those kind of decisions?
So, Kailey, that's the question. In a split government, how do they negotiate that out? I think if it's a Biden presidency, because the individual tax cuts expire, he's going to have a little bit of leverage to get some of what he wants from a split Congress. For Trump, I think his ambitions of lowering everything may go away. So I think if you're looking at Biden's proposals, I think $400,000 and above, you're gonna pay more taxes. The question is what? Under $400,000, I think it'd be protected. Corporate tax, that's gonna be a negotiation. I don't think they're gonna go up to the 28% that Biden wants to. You may have to compromise on that. So from our perspective, the tax policy, I think, is gonna be somewhere in the middle. You're not gonna, we think split government's where we're headed. Now, if we don't have split government, that's where it gets very interesting.
Yeah, that's when things can actually change. I know you're not a market strategist, you're a policy guy.
Yes.
But with that said, when you back off and look at the markets, the last couple of presidencies and maybe where they're going here, are both of these guys lucky to be here? When we look at this period of time, we're in a generational rally, a generational advance in the stock market. It's not a bad time to be here and take credit for it, is it?
No, you're absolutely right. And I hope we're not just lucky to be here. I hope it continues.
You're here.
But no, I think the markets have really been resilient regardless of what the policies have been. There may be volatility at times to adjust to what the new norm is, but new innovation, U.S. is driving most of that with our innovative entrepreneurial spirit.
So the U.S. may have the companies and the innovation and be, leading in terms of equity markets around the world, but the U.S. also historically is just a leader in the world in terms of democracy. And Joe Biden is very much trying to make this election about the future of that democracy and the way that the U.S. is going to be able to lead other democracies in the future. How should we think about the geopolitical element to what will go down tonight, what we'll hear from these candidates, but what this election means for the United States' standing in the global order?
So I think when I talk to clients in Asia or Europe, there's a much more acute concern about that. In the U.S., it's split. I mean, if you look at the polling, just as many people who favor Trump are concerned about Biden's effect on democracy as the other way around. But overseas, it's really tilted towards the concern about the ongoing democratic state and leading the world amongst our allies. So, look, I think clearly amongst our allies, I think there's a preference for Biden. But in the U.S., I think when we looked at it, we really didn't see a difference with respect to Trump may be more radical in his talking, but you kind of end up closer together with respect to policy. If I talk about tail risk, that's a whole other thing. But we're looking at the most likely risks at this time.
This is a real reality check, with a lot of the wild stuff that you hear in anticipation of a change in power. The market view is important to us. Does it become potentially more volatile or a higher risk, for instance, for commodities? You talk about oil prices, metals, copper, some of the things that we do see sometimes turn on a dime.
No, it does. But what we found is that, in our report that we released on the impact of the policies on the markets, the interesting thing we saw was that with Biden, oil companies did great. But under Trump, alternative fuels did great. And partly that's because of other externalities. So you had the Russia-Ukraine war.
Sure.
That's why those companies, oil companies, did well under Biden. So you have to mix it in with other things that are impacting the market. So it's not just all policy, even though policy is a factor.
Well, speaking of other things that are impacting the market, obviously Fed policy could be hugely consequential, not just in terms of potentially helping decide the outcome of this election, whether or not we get a rate cut, but also what happens to the independence of the Federal Reserve after the fact. I wouldn't be surprised if Trump and Biden both got a question about the Fed in the debate tonight, potentially. How should we be considering whose president might influence the trajectory of monetary policy going forward?
So, look, I think if it's Biden, I think it's steady state, at least on the surface, allow them to be independent, even though you may be trying to influence in other ways. Whereas Trump is going to be pretty straightforward. He's going to be pretty aggressive. He's said that he's going to, change the way that works. But he'll definitely browbeat the Fed chair if he's there, which can, potentially lower rates faster than they otherwise would come down.
All right, Andy Blocker, Global Head of Public Policy and Strategic Partnerships at Invesco. Thank you so much for joining us here in our Washington, D.C. studio on what is Debate Day.
Thanks for listening to the Balance of Power podcast. Make sure to subscribe if you haven't already at Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. And you can find us live every weekday from Washington, D.C. at noontime Eastern at Bloomberg.com.